Because Osorio Cesar started his work in the 1920s, so he was highly influenced by the anthropophagismo and the upcoming modernism. For example, he was in relationship with Tarsila do Amaral. So they traveled together to Turkey, to Russia, and they were highly influenced by the Trotskyist ideas in the 1930s. So I think Osorio Cesar, even being a medicine, but as well writing art critics, he was as well trying to search for alternatives in the art production, not just the European role models to adapt them, but to search in the own hospital and the environment in Brazil to form this new nation that was upcoming after 1922. And the second thing is that you mentioned that Alice Brill neutralized the hospital environment. There are 2 photo series of indigenous people she just made some years after she went to the hospital, so she was interested in both the indigenous but as well children and children painting and into mentally ill in the hospitals. So, and if you see, I didn't bring any photographic examples, but you have all these examples in the same manner. So she always tried to neutralize. So perhaps the fact you mentioned is right. Mm-hmm. And the third thing is, in my master's thesis, I'm interested how the art was exposed in exhibitions. At that time, there is never written it's a patient or the illness. It's never important, but you have just the painting and then the caption where it's written. It's albino bras from Jucari, and just inside there's no okay, this is mentally ill or meant to be mental ill. And on the reception of Freud, we know that Osorio Cesar, he was in his therapeutic work highly influenced by the works of Freud. So he tried to read the patient art in Sigmund Freud manner. Mm-hmm. So he tried to he often quotes Freud in his describing of the artworks. And later, in the 1950s and 60s, when we have the second example of Nice da Silveira, she's more influenced by Jung. So there's a shift from the just sexualized and reading of the paintings, but into a more Jungian reading. So I don't know if there are more questions on my talk from the audience, or if you can. Yeah.
I think it's interesting. I would like to know more about this connection between Brill and Freud and Vienna in general, because as you probably know, Vienna indeed was one of the centers in the 20s, late 20s, early 90s, one of the Central European cities and centers where psychologists started to establish new ways to cure, new ways to help people who are suffering from mental illness. And my question would be, was she in contact only with Freud, or did she establish contact with other Viennese art historians?
The connection is Osorio Cesar, the medicine, because he's older than Brill. She was just, I think, in my age when she did the series. So Osorio Cesar knew about Freud. They had letter contact. So, and he told him, you are doing this art for therapeutic purpose, but we are institutionalizing it. And Freud was surprised, and he told him, okay, this is very interesting material, perhaps you can write a book on it, and I will publish it in my magazine Imago. So, this is, Freud knew about Brazilian institutionalization. he used it, of course, like in Europe, everybody was influenced at that time from Freud theory and psychiatric painting. So, but the institutionalization is the new thing.
But it's just about Freud and not about the fourth circle.
Yes. And later we have the Jung, Nise da Severa, the second example is influenced by Jung, and she's then like bringing the Jung circle to Rio. Like she was studying 1 year in Vienna, and then she got back, no, in Zurich, and then she got back and like started an own Jungian circle.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think I'm not that far away from Sergio Martins in the connection between experiencing and especially Oiticica, who still was constructing this concept of new Brazilian objectivity, said there has to be a constructive will. But I'm making maybe it's problem of finding a word, but I'm making a difference in the thing that he says I think in the late 60s, I'm not constructing anymore, I'm not, I think constructing, I'm proposing now. And I think that's a difference also regarding where Babylonest happened. So all his penetraves and the relevos espaciais, who also needed participation, everything happened still in a museum. And then he said, I don't want to have exhibitions in museums anymore. And he had this work in the University of Sussex, which for me was a remarkably cut, when he said, for the first time I'm able to suggest anything in a space, and I'm not saying, and there is no border anymore. So I think the space opened more, and I think the space in Babylonese is very open, but also it's so important that it happened in his apartment and not in a white cube or not in a museum. So I would say his constructive will is still existing, but I would call it now proposal will, or maybe that's the thing of finding a right word. And the integration of media, I didn't mention it today, but it's super important. I will do it in my master's thesis, which this trashy aspect, which was already existing in Tropicalia, where there was this television, you could penetrate and enter, and find there was a television. So, but that was good that you mentioned it again. I will focus a bit more on this. Also the underground experience, and that's a very, very important differentiation between Schwitters and Oiticica when I'm comparing it. It's very hard sometimes, because not just a 40 years time leap, it's Oiticica was now in New York, he was doing drugs, he was having he started or could be gay, and it was very open, and there was the rock music and this underground scene. So, but I will focus more on it, on my work. So,
I totally can follow what you say. There's one aspect we have to see. Of course, he was a bit idiosyncratic with institutions like museums, but. He was then showing also in the 1970 MoMA show information.
Yeah.
It was not that he was rejecting every invitation, and the fact that he was showing in his apartment had also to do with the drug use. It was illegal. He couldn't do that. It was a kind of, as we mentioned then in Max Horcher, Hindra, me in our book, it was also a part of an economy of people living in the exile. It had a materialist basis. So there are so many, and you already mentioned many levels. I just wanted, also to read a bit against the artistic credo of this confusion of art and life, and a bit to question that, and to ask, what does that mean at that moment? And we shouldn't follow up this idea of authenticity. He was so anti-authentic in his own, it was a second order authenticity, as I try to explain. So that, I think, is important here. And otherwise, one would too much open it up for probably problematic readings in the context of modern biopower, for example. You could then say, as some scholars do, that he had to do with some ideas of biopolitics in terms of, really to understand life as a human resource for art, for artistic practice. So one has to be really careful with the categories here. That is the only thing I wanted to say.
Right. Also, the circumstances, I think he was illegal from 73 in New York City. He had no visa anymore. And there's also a question, how can you, without having a visa in a country, how can you exhibit? Sure, this is all the,
And there was never, I would say, probably you might know better than me, whereas you can see in the historical avant-garde, and probably that is also to be problematized, that there's a kind of naive idea of life as something good, as a horizon of sense and a horizon of development. I would say that Oiticiga was so aware of the spoiled life, spoiled by alienated work and labor, as he was mentioning then how hard it was to organize his life in New York, that he had to work during the nights and so on. Life was not a kind of naive and unspoiled category. It was more, I would probably here quote Thomas Elsässer, who once in another context said it was the other way around. It was to make the life more similar to art. There was more, and that would also explain why he would defend the idea of the sublime, but more in a trashy second-order sense, not in a kind of elitist sense, of course, or modernist or formalist sense. And it was more the other way around, I would say.
Yeah, I think that we don't have much time, but just complimenting Samet. Life was a constant struggle for him at that time. I mean, he was living basically after his Guggenheim scholarship finished. He was living on the rent of the house in Rio, which his two brothers, kindly passed on to him, which wasn't much actually, because rent at that time wasn't as expensive as it is today. But it was really a constant struggle. I mean, it was, he didn't enjoy working at midnight to 6 at all language. I mean, obviously not. But what I would just very, very briefly like to comment, which really struck me as very interesting in both of your works, is the question of photographs as documents. Because in both of them, in your work and in yours as well, the photograph as a document has a total importance. I mean, it's you were using Alice Brill's photographs, which you sort of had to find them and find out that they were more than they were supposed to be. And in your case, Miriam, you were using mine and my brother's photographs. And on the other hand, when Ferreira Goulart wrote about Merzbow, he also used photographs, because he never went there to see it, obviously. So in all of this, what we're dealing with here really is, in our work, in our daily work actually, as art historians, in mine specifically as a photographer as well, is this question of how to deal with these photographs when we use them as documents, not anymore just as aesthetic objects, but really as documents. And I think this would be interesting in both of your works. Okay, just one more very quick. I think the main difference between, one of the big differences between Merzbow and Bandolness, and then Hendrix also, which was the other one, smaller, which we saw yesterday, is the question that Elio had shelter also. And I don't think this question of shelter appears anywhere. I don't know, I might be wrong in this, but I don't think Merzbow, Schritter's Merzbow, this idea of shelter, abrigo, mundo abrigo, I don't think this was present in this book. This was very much, and again, this leads us back to the question of the struggle there. I mean, the loft, Babylonness and Hendrix were really sort of shelters from the outside, the mean world outside, let's say.
Contribution. Like, of course, I don't know. it's a question. Just as in your mind, Hollywood Babylon popped up, in my mind, what popped up was New Babylon by Constant, who was part of the situations. I don't know if he has any knowledge of this. It's just a guess. But the construction of situations and so on. But he stick to Schwitters in terms of shelter, but in a totally different way. Schwitters was very much playing with words and titles, and one of the titles of the Meersbau was KDEE, Cathedral of Erotic Misery. So that was not Tisica's idea, that I'm very, very sure. But he was playing because this minimalism of architecture is very much Constant's idea, and he was making maps, but Du Bois threw him out of the group because in the end they were aesthetic objects. He wanted a life situation, Du Bois situation. So I don't know if there's any connection. If he did have any knowledge about situationist Constant, New Babylon was a project of Constant. I have no idea.
So all the text I wrote directly from Oiticica referring to Babylonese, the word Babylonese, there's no connection. Yeah. I didn't read anything.
But it sounds like New Babylon.
It sounds so. The only thing he writes is Babylonese for him is New York, and the nest is the Niño. So that's why he invented this word. I have no idea if Andreas has any
just a guess.
Yeah, no. So I didn't read anything in the archive.
What I can add here is that Luis Kamnitzer wrote in his book on Latin American art that there was a violent reception of the international situationists.
And could read French.
Yeah. But this is...
Oiticica refers to Guy Debord.
I'm sorry?
Oiticica refers to Guy Debord.
Guy Debord.
So not in a very kind of development.
Okay, thank you.